Ethan!
Onward.
Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. So today I figured I'd just, talk a little bit about Luigi Mangione, the CEO assassin. And to talk about him, I figured I would compare him to someone else, Soghomon Tehlirian. So, Soghomon Tehlirian was a part of a team of assassins that helped to avenge the Armenian genocide by the Muslims and the Young Turks when they fled to, I think it was Germany, after the genocide. Basically, the perpetrators and organisers of the Armenian genocide in the failing Ottoman Empire scapegoated a bunch of minorities, but mainly the Armenians at the time, for just their general failures in government. The Armenians at the time were basically in Islamic governments, you have things called Qmees, and they are subject to the jizya. So basically you have the Islamic people, they're not subjected to any taxes, but you have minorities and they're all second-class citizens, they're all subject to taxation, reduced religious freedom, that sort of deal. After, I forget which war it was, I think it was World War I, the Ottoman Empire just ate shit and sort of collapsed economically. In so doing, they needed to scapegoat someone because, you can't, explicitly blame Islam or Islamic principles or that sort of thing for a failing empire, can you? Anyway, point being, they scapegoated the Armenians and organised what was essentially mass deportation of the Armenians at the time, which essentially resulted in the mass march/murder/rape of a bunch of Armenian civilians by Muslims and their gendarmes, which is basically a Muslim police/army. And basically the Armenians were marched into the desert, and along the way they were killed, executed, raped, the whole deal. Really bad shit, right? By the way, Cenk of the Young Turks at one point was a denier of the Armenian genocide. And his co-star Anna Kasparian is an Armenian of Armenian descent. So, yeah, weird shit on the left, like usual, right? Weird shit on the left. Also, their media organisation is named after the Young Turks, which was the government the sort of post-revolutionary government in charge at the time of the genocide. Yeah, very suspect, the whole thing. We won't talk too much about it. Basically, so the genocide happened. In response to this, the remaining Armenian genocides, basically a bunch of them like ex-military and that sort of deal, organised into like a hit squad, and they hunted down and they killed the perpetrators that were in charge in government at the time of the genocide. There were many more killings. It's all detailed in the book called Operation Nemesis, which like is quite a read. Like, I would strongly recommend it. It's a great book. But we right now are just specifically talking about one of them. We're talking about Soghomon Tehlirian, because he resembles basically Luigi Mangione right down to the last detail, pretty much. Except that Luigi Mangione wasn't a ex-military figure or anything like that, but he was still killing someone that was responsible for murder, basically, right? That wasn't getting punished by the law, let's say. So basically, after the genocide, one of the perpetrators of the genocide fled to, I think it was Germany, and of course wasn't punished by Germany for its crimes. So basically, law and order completely failed. Germany didn't want to take a part in it. It was just sort of messy, disgusting politics in another country. And if they took part in it, which was what was essentially a pro-Islamic genocide, they could expect other Arab nations to possibly turn on them, just because it was, yeah, it was a pro-Islamic genocide. Let's just say that. So our mate Soghomon tracked him down there, identified him in the street, walked past him, looked him right in the eye, and then turned around and shot him right through the back of the head, killing him instantly on the street in broad daylight. The plan was then for him to just drop the gun and surrender to police immediately, but he sort of freaked out a little bit and fled, later giving himself up to police. The idea was always that he was going to give himself up to police. He was then, like, after that, arrested and then put to trial. This is where it gets interesting. His defense wasn't anything like, oh, insane mind, self-defense, none of that. His defense was mostly all of the evidence of the Armenian genocide perpetrated on the Armenian people and how his victim was responsible for it, basically. Long story short, one thing led to another. He was subsequently acquitted and set free. So what's the moral of the story here? Why am I comparing Luigi Mangione to Soghomon Tehlirian, who I'm sure we'd all agree, if you can't kill someone who's guilty of genociding people, innocent people, like a million of them, if you can't kill that person, what can you do in the face of the law? It's very much like learned helplessness, I'll just say that. So why am I comparing them? Well, both of them acted in the absence of justice provided by the government, likely through corruption, right? Sure, they're both not on the same magnitude. One was responsible for millions of deaths, the other one, a little bit shady. A few, let's say, but you would also have to prove them, right? You would have to prove that an individual was due the healthcare, and their AI app, which was very fond of denying claims, denied a claim someone deserved, and the person died subsequently of the lack of healthcare from that claim, or had their lifespan drastically reduced from lack of treatment, like that sort of deal. That's still kind of murder in my opinion, but yeah, okay. To all the conservatives out there that are just sort of blindly defending like law and order and institutions, even when the institutions are corrupt, it's a bit weird. It gets a bit weird at some point. Like, you can't outright defend a corrupt institution that's doing corrupt shit, right? I mean, sure, you can make an argument for stability and that sort of shit, but can you though? Can you, when it's clear, when it's out in the open like that? Anyway, look, it gets a little bit grey, right? But anyway, like, we'll get back to the point. So the CEO, whatever else may be said, had a duty for and was ultimately responsible for the policy that resulted in the AI that resulted in the denial of health claims. Of those denials of health claims, surely some of the individuals who deserved healthcare were robbed, making him guilty of robbery. Of those robbed, some may have died or at least had their lifespans drastically reduced due to denial of rightful claims. Which, in my opinion, sort of negligent homicide, sort of manslaughter. I wouldn't go out like so far as to say deliberate, intentional, first-degree murder, but let's call it manslaughter, right? So that, by definition, is a failure of duty resulting in someone's death, which is, by definition, negligent homicide / manslaughter, depending, right? Now, every establishment crony, and I am particularly disappointed by the right here, are all like parroting the line, never take the law into your own hands, always helplessly rely on the government for justice. Even when obviously the government is completely failing in its duty to provide justice. And it's very apparent, right? So this same argument here would have applied in the Soghomon Tehlirian case to allow a person who conducted an Armenian genocide to literally be free, right? You would be arguing, no, you cannot kill the member of the Young Turks who was responsible for some of the policy that resulted in the Armenian genocide. You would have to rely on the German government there in order to seek justice. You wouldn't be able to take justice in your own hands. As a result, obviously, German government wasn't doing shit about it, was letting him walk around free, didn't want to take a part in it at all. That's just, deny justice, right? Here, it's similar but lower stakes. So, as mentioned before, would be something akin to either robbery or manslaughter or something like that. Negligent homicide, let's say, by the denial of claims. But the principle here is this learned helplessness, this reliance on government, even when the government is obviously completely failing in its duty to provide justice. It's just this conditioning of learned helplessness. In essence, they're saying do nothing in the face of obvious evil, where the mechanism you have deferred authority and justice to is just completely and obviously failing right in front of you. It's obvious to everyone, but just let it happen sort of deal, right? It's obviously not good. Now, having said that, I don't want anyone to straw man what I'm saying here. I'm not saying vigilante justice is always justified, but when it is correct, it is justified, right? I'm not saying everyone is guilty until proven innocent either. That's, famously, a Stalinist communist thing to do. They'd have all these show trials where they're already found guilty. They'd be tried by a committee rather than a jury of their peers, and be sentenced to prison. I'm obviously saying not that either. I fucking hate communists. They're dirty pieces of shit. Don't like socialists, don't like Marxists. Having said all that, people do deserve the benefit of the doubt when the state is accusing them of something, or anyone else for that matter, really, right? Because you can get false accusations, and the principle behind that is you want the accusations to be proven in a court of law before a jury of peers. You don't want them to be banana republic, trial by committee sort of bullshit, right? You don't want the government in charge of who can live, who can die, because basically you'll get a Stalin who just orders the deaths of people, or you'll get someone like Starmer who says you go to prison for 2 years for insulting police because they, failed completely when it came to the grooming gangs and mass immigration violence and all that sort of deal, right? But, what I am saying is, if an authority is corrupt, and clearly so, it doesn't deserve that respect or deference You aren't under the authority of a corrupt authority, to put it, simply. It's a fallacy, right? It's an appeal to corrupt authority. That itself is a fallacy, an argument. It shouldn't be accepted in society, right? It's just like you don't need to defer to it. Like, in so doing, you're doing evil by deferring to a corrupt authority that is deliberately not providing justice. For example, ignoring a perpetrator and organizer of a genocide, or completely ignoring the failing of the law completely to hold the policymakers that resulted in mass denial of claims, which resulted in either direct robbery or direct negligent homicide, let's say, of countless individuals. In the case of the healthcare CEO, right? It'd be learned helplessness in both cases. Like, they're both obvious crimes, and they're both being ignored by the mechanism you've deferred to provide justice. None of that is acceptable. The conservatives that say that, or at least hint at that, it's not good. It's not productive, right? The people that are just out saying, oh, don't kill CEOs or whatever, and outright saying Luigi Mangione is just a murderer and there's nothing else to it. No, that's a straw man. There is actually more to that, and it is an important point to point that out. You're not under any obligation to defer to a corrupt authority that fails to provide justice to maintain stability in a society, right? It's up to the authority to earn its authority. It's not just blankly given. This is an issue with conservatives, right? Is this obedience to authority? The left have it too, but they have it they have it a little bit differently because they've got a different moral foundation. Conservatives will blindly follow orders, and they'll see it as duty, whereas leftists will do it in the name of narrative, right? So you get your communists in China killing the landowners, you get the communists in the Soviet Union killing the kulaks because they're allegedly they're robbing everyone, right? So it just functions a little bit differently under moral foundations, but it's both the same thing. You're both deferring to a corrupt authority that's lying. In so doing, you're either killing people or denying justice, that sort of deal. You're outsourcing your moral authority to basically evil, which is, not good. Just to, rhetorically hammer the point home, you shouldn't obey bad laws and policies and bad precedent that directly attacks, your safety, other people's safety, and your rights and other people's constitutional rights, right? And that applies for taxation as well. Obviously, you shouldn't accept extra taxation for a social cause you don't believe in or you observe to be corrupt. One or the other. The short answer is no to the, to all of those questions. Both of them are fallacious, right? They're appeals to corrupt authority and appeals to corrupt power, or just an appeal to power in general. The second is an appeal to corrupt moral authority and power. You're under no obligation to obey either. Morally speaking, and if they attempt to use power, if they attempt to deprive your life and liberty from you in either of those cases, just to push forward the policy to enforce it, I would say you are entitled to self-defense. Defense of self and the right to bear arms and defense of others. Well, in America anyway. In Australia it's a bit different. We don't have guns, we don't have the explicitly stated right to self-defense because of our dumb shit government giving it up. And of course I disagree with the government on both of those counts, especially when you've got fucking bikies and drug dealers from I won't mention the nationality, but you got drug dealers from certain countries shooting each other in gangland killings in Sydney, South Sydney, Western Sydney, etc. Like, the fact that we're disarmed and you can't even control the criminals, that's already too bad. That's before you factor in the threat to individuals just from the government who may decide to, you know, pull at a Young Turks and decide to scapegoat a certain minority and scapegoating, extra taxation, all that sort of thing, genociding. Like, the government can just decide to do that at any point, and there's no major incentive to not do it. Like, in a country, let's say, where you have the right to bear arms and everyone is armed, those countries are really hard to invade because everyone has the ability to fucking fight, right? Like, even the civilians. Like, you're not taking those areas in house-to-house fighting without significant losses. The same idea applies to a tyrannical government that's trying to enforce laws and policies, let's say, that will basically enslave people, kill people, extrajudicially punish people, that sort of deal, right? Giving up your guns and deferring all authority to people in the government is a bad idea. I don't know if you realise this, the people in the government are fucking idiots sometimes, right? Like, during COVID, they very casually voted away your right to medical autonomy. They very casually did that. Like, there was no real thought there at all. There was no real respect for the right for your choice during that time. Who's to say they can't do it with other things that are your, you know, God-given rights, God-given constitutional rights, your speech. Look at what's happening in the UK right now. You have Lynch, who went to prison. I think he was cussing out police officers that were defending migrant hotels at the time. Cussing them out when the police officers, in their own right, should probably be in fucking prison because they've absolutely failed to prosecute the grooming gangs at the time, and they fucking knew about them at the time, right? They ignored flat out, you know, horrible pedophilia shit at the time. That's just a complete moral failing of authority. Now you're saying we should defer to that authority in all matters to do with justice and force? Like, that's a fucking terrible idea, like, outright. And it should be said that the government really does rely on consent of the people. Like, it becomes an impossible equation when the government tries to suppress its people like this, right? Like, just take just look at what the IRA were able to accomplish in Ireland. Like, despite the complete outlawing of guns, and why. Like, the teeth of the state at that point were, you know, obviously the police, and they had complete superiority, let's say, in local numbers and firepower at the time because they, you know, outlawed guns. But strategically speaking, they're outnumbered like 20 to 1. It's only local superiority that they're allowed to sort of manage. And in terms of tactics, like, alone, like, police as a whole, they are extremely susceptible to ambush. The IRA, like, put this into effect in Ireland, like, big time. There was a book about it. It was called Fry the Brain. Basically, the idea was the police have to respond to crimes, right? It's their stated duty to respond to crimes. You call them up, you give them a location of a crime, they have to respond to it, right? That, strategically speaking, allows you to plan ambushes of police. Like, the IRA did this all the fucking time, by the way. They would either do that, or they would catch an informant in the IRA that was, like, police linked, and they would, like, kill them and just dump them on the street, or they'd report a crime in, or they would booby trap something, right? That would draw, like, a police patrol, and we're not talking just police alone, we're talking sort of military grade police at this point, right? They're fully armoured, they've got guns, all that sort of thing. IRA The IRA got around that at the time by basically just sort of smuggling in one gun, usually like some sort of rifle or whatever, and they would draw a patrol by either dumping a killed informant or just reporting in IRA movements to the police or whatever. They would draw them into an area that would draw a patrol of police into the area. They would usually draw them into city block areas that had limited sight around corners, and they would just wait for a patrol to walk around a corner, and they'd wait for like the last person to be walking around the corner of the block where there's no other visibility, and they just take a guerrilla snipe at that last patrol person and just like attritionally, work them down that way. And then after they just took that one shot, they'd just displace. They'd displace, get rid of the gun, take off their stockings, they'd shower to get rid of all the gun residue and everything. Like, all of this is in the book Fry the Brain, by the way, which you can buy on eBay. And isn't that interesting, like, that book hasn't been banned? But then again, they haven't banned 120 Days of Sodom. You can go into a bookstore and find that anywhere. Like, if ever you're going to make a case for banning a book, 120 Days of Sodom is a pretty good fucking case. It's just like a series of blasphemous pedophilia. It's a fucking horrible book. I only made it like halfway through it, and I was really trying to make it through that book. But anyway, back to the point. The IRA would just, call them in and attritionally pick at them, right? They wouldn't go for body shots because of the armor. They wouldn't go for headshots because they're hard to land. They would instead shoot below the armor at the intestine wall, basically. They would just try to inflict horrible wounds on them that would put them in severe pain. And the idea here isn't to deter the state specifically, it's to deter the police individually, right? Because the police at the time they're acting under the, the whole, I was just following orders sort of thing, right? When they're doing this, when they're crushing the IRA, when they're going into areas, they're suppressing people, they're taking away people's guns, they're removing their civil rights, they're imprisoning them, that sort of deal. The common excuse there is they're just following orders. If you can be held to account for just following these orders, it becomes a lot grayer and a lot harder to justify, especially when you've got that fear of being sniped into them. And that's what the IRA were trying to accomplish there, right? But the whole point of bringing up the IRA is just that it's happened in the past where the police and the government have tried to remove people's rights unjustly just in the name of sort of conquest when it came to Ireland, right? There seems to be a similar sort of thing happening now, but with more of a globalist bent to it. Especially with regards to speech, and especially in places like Canada and the UK. But all that being said, obviously it's evil to do this to police enforcing laws, but I will put the asterisk there, laws you have consented to. Like, if police are enforcing laws that directly impact your freedoms that you aren't consenting to, that are obviously, things like hate speech, destruction of the First Amendment, that sort of thing. If you're getting put into prison for things like Peter Lynch did, for insulting police, for failing to prevent or punish grooming gangs, which is outright horrible gang pedophilia. And then in response to that, in response to being cussed out, basically, what did they do? They basically assaulted him, kidnapped him, imprisoned him, and imprisoned him directly in an area that put his health at risk of gangs, right? Asian gangs, but we all know it means Islamic gangs. If we take all that into consideration, it looks a hell of a lot like self-defense to me to fight the cops, to prevent that from happening. It's a different case if you're like assaulting people or domestically abusing people or whatever, and then the police come and then they assault you and put you in prison, right? It's a very different case. But if you've just cussed out police for their failures, and the idea is that you're somehow upsetting some sort of moral order by doing so, and then they get to do that to you, like, that's just fucking unacceptable, like, outright. What's happening in the UK is fucking unacceptable, period. Like, I wouldn't respect a single UK policeman that, you know, abides by those decisions, put it that way. Like, lesbian Nana, go fuck yourself. Like, you're an evil person. You should be in prison yourself for assaulting that autistic girl, right? But at the point that they put you in prison with the gangs, it is straight up a threat to your health by them. They might as well be killing you themselves if like some sort of grooming gang or Islamic gang in prison manages to kill you, right? The police are completely responsible for that death at that point. So at that point, resisting the police enforcing those stupid fucking laws looks a lot to me like self-defense outright, and it would justify actions sort of like the IRA. Not that I'm advocating for doing that, but yeah, look, the logical process is there, right? What exactly do you have to lose if you're going to get put into prison anyway and probably have your life at threat anyway in prison? Like, are you going to let them put them in, just put you into prison for just words, or do you want to actually earn being in prison by, you know, a logical sense? But, like, he went to prison not even for, like, threats or anything, not even for, like, calls to actionable threats. He was just cussing out the police because they were fucking up, because they were just failures. And in terms of self-defense, there's like a common rule. Like, it's not so common in Democrat areas because they're trying to just completely strip the individual of the right to self-defense. But in terms of self-defense, you don't need to wait to be hit in order to defend yourself, right? If you can reasonably interpret the situation as going to lead to violence, you can hit first. And with something like as powerful as the state hitting you, it's obviously there's only going to be one hit, and it's probably going to be the first and only hit when the state hits you, when it just like rocks up with like, you know, 5 people and they all grab you and then it's just like a wrestle, right? But like the element of surprise will give you between like 100 to 1 or a 10 to 1 tactical advantage in the moment. And it's also good to point out we aren't being judged by committee or council just yet. We are still judged by a jury of our peers, and I suggest we start, you know, taking that into account when we look at certain cases of police overreach and that sort of thing. And let's say an individual's response to police overreach, particularly when stupid fucking laws are in place, like, you know, hate speech laws or laws that outlaw speech that aren't direct, you know, threats or calls to action. Let's say that. Yeah, it's starting to look a lot like just regular self-defense to me. And needless to say, if I found myself on a jury judging the guilt or innocence of someone like Luigi Mangione, I'm not gonna enforce, you know, what would you say, some gigantic narrative by some, you know, healthcare insurance monopoly, right? I'm gonna judge this from what I see as right and what I see as wrong, which is, you know, very likely going to be acquitting Luigi Mangione, despite the fact that it looks a lot like first-degree murder, really. Like, he premeditated it, he went there, he shot him through the back. But how can we judge him guilty of that while ignoring what the AI that this CEO was responsible for, and the complete failure of the police in that aspect, right? The police didn't, charge any of these CEOs for any of this. Like, how are we going to find Luigi Mangione guilty here? Like, it'd just be completely inconsistent. And it is a jury of peers. You can use your subjective judgment in that jury. Especially when subjective judgment was used for Soghomon Tehlirian's case.